Hello guys, it's me again talking about religion. My third video on religion in 3 days. Stop viewing my channel. I'll stop talking about religion. Don't encourage me, please, because once I get started, I won't stop. But anyway, if you're still here and you're prepared to listen, what I want to talk about today is a debate which I watched on YouTube between Matt Dillahunty and a pediatric neurosurgeon by the name of Michael Egnor, who is a Catholic and who was arguing as a position of a theist, arguing for the existence of God. The title of the debate is "Does God exist?" Fair enough. And I wanted to make some comments, having watched the debate. I wanted to make. I'm not going to go through the arguments which were presented. That's not really my purpose, but I wanted to reflect on what I think were the sort of strong points of the debate and the weak points, and how each of the participants acquitted themselves. Obviously, I will declare straight away that both of them could run rings around me, because I'm fairly new to this. Okay, I've watched a few hundred episodes of the Atheist Experience, but I'm very much an amateur atheist. So I'm not well rehearsed in all of the philosophical arguments, although I kind of know most of them, really know what their weaknesses are. And so in this debate, there was a moderator, and there was Matt, and there was Michael. The screen was divided. Obviously, they weren't sitting in the same room. And it took place, or at least it was uploaded on the 21st of September last year. So I'd just like to say that I've been following Matt now for, I don't know, 10 years or so, I suppose, and I've watched all the episodes back to when he first started doing the Atheist Experience, and I've noticed that he has changed a lot. He's, I'm a big fan of his. I think he's absolutely phenomenal. If you consider that he hasn't got a degree in philosophy, or he hasn't got any academic qualifications that could really help him in debating religion. But his knowledge and the way that he can break down arguments is absolutely fantastic. He's got an answer for absolutely everything, and I think that he's evolved in many ways, but there's a very angry side of him which is manifesting more and more, and that does concern me. Not because I think his arguments are weak or no good, but because his opponents will seize on that and use it against him, as happened today in the debate that I watched today. So I think that Matt, in many ways, was at his zenith about 5-6 years ago. If you go back and look at the Atheist Experience, he was not only incredibly sharp, but he had a fairly good rein on his temper. It would take a lot to really make him angry. And he was, I think he was probably more effective at that particular time in his career than he is now. I think he's a bit hasty and a bit abrupt, particularly on the Atheist Experience. There are many times when people come on and they they don't quite deliver what they promise when they speak to the call screeners. And he can get very angry about this and just say, fuck off if you're not prepared to, if you're not prepared to have a proper, honest debate and along the lines of what you told this call screener, I'm not interested in talking to you. And then he will just shuffle them away, which is a shame in many ways, because I think that whoever the caller is, whoever it is, they've got a point of view. They believe in something. And what's interesting is, why do they believe it? Matt himself has always said, what do you believe and why? Okay, there are callers who will refuse to say what they believe. So they'll come on with a gotcha argument and try to trap the atheists, but they won't say what they believe. And in a way, we kind of saw this in the debate that I watched today. We have a theist who is basically coming on to try and trip up the atheist. He's not coming on arguing for his own beliefs and explaining why he truly believes what he believes and all the nuances of what he believes. He's prevaricating with lots of strategies, essentially to try and trap the atheist and make him look dumb and go away claiming victory. That's fair enough. It's the art of debate. That's the way that a lot of debates are done. It's not what Matt does. Matt genuinely tries to get to the heart of the argument, and he tries to break it down. I think he gives the argument a fair assessment, and he applies his own rationale to each argument which is presented to him. I think he's quite an honest debater, which leaves him prey to people like this guy, Michael Egnor, because he quite clearly had a plan, quite a cunning plan really, and Matt sort of fell for it. And it doesn't mean that God exists. It doesn't mean that Matt lost the debate in that sense, but there were very awkward moments for Matt in this debate. And don't get me wrong, this guy Michael Egnor is such an arrogant piece of rubbish, quite frankly. He's not the kind of guy you want to know. He's just comes across as just completely horrible. But that's not how I'm assessing him. In terms of his debating style, there were certain things about him that were quite effective. Now, I always think that with a Christian against an atheist, the Christian has got the much harder job. Atheists have got an easy job because they don't really have to say anything except I'm not convinced, or highlight flaws in an argument, or I'm open to a belief in God, convince me. A Christian, or theist, has got a much, much harder job because here we've got a supposed super being of the universe who created the universe, who is supernatural. He can't be seen, he can't be detected anywhere. There's no way of detecting this being, and or at least there doesn't seem to be. And there's no proper empirical evidence for the existence of God. And Christians have got a much harder job than an atheist does. So in that sense, I don't blame Christians for looking for strategies to try and undermine atheism, rather than establishing proof for their theism. Because it's much easier to try and pick holes in the atheist position than it is to provide evidence for your own position. And what evidence can be provided for a God that never shows himself, and in all likelihood probably doesn't exist. So bearing this in mind, the way that the debate started was surprising in one way. Michael Egnor was given, I think, 10 or 12 minutes or 13 minutes to introduce his case. And I've never seen anybody do anything like this before, because usually when a theist presents his case, he will... there are usually lots of reasons, lots of philosophical arguments, and what you do is you bring your A game, you bring your best argument, you present that, and you expand it, and you bolster it, and you try to make it as strong and rational as you possibly can, and provide as much evidence as possible. But what Egnor did was he reeled off one by one all the principal philosophical arguments for the existence of God. He didn't expound upon them. He didn't present them. He just literally titled them one after the other. And the main ones that he focused on were the 5 arguments of St. Thomas Aquinas, who I think lived in the 12th century and is one of the key figures in Christian philosophy. So, so he listed these 10, and he said, these are well proven by time, and these are sufficient these arguments are sufficient really to establish the existence of God. We don't really need anything else. I hope I'm not mischaracterizing him, but that's more or less what he said. And he got through these 10 arguments so quickly. Oh, he didn't get through them. He just literally listed them one after the other. St. Thomas Aquinas, there were 5. One of them is the one that Matt kind of got stuck on. I'll come to that in a minute. Argument from causation, sort of cosmological argument. And he just went through them one after the other. And he got through them so quickly. There was literally 3 minutes left of his own time remaining, and he had nothing. He had nothing more to say. He was literally. He just reeled these off one after the other. Said, "Well, there's my case." It's not that different from what I was saying in my video yesterday. That if you're coming to listen to what I've got to say about the existence of God, religion, atheism, etc., don't leave in the comments links to videos and say, well, there's my case. Don't do that. And I would say that Michael Egnor, he shouldn't have done that either. I don't think it's honest. I don't think it's an honest way to debate, really. Because, well, in Matt's case, when it was his turn to talk, he did comment on that. He did say, I've never seen that before. You just literally, I wasn't expecting you to reel off 10 arguments for the existence of God, or at least just the titles of the arguments, the references to the arguments. He was saying, I wasn't expecting that kind of presentation. And then he went on to just very briefly describe or state his case as to why he didn't think that God exists. Partly divine hiddenness for him is the kind of key argument against the existence of God. So Matt spoke for 10 or 15 minutes, and then they went into open discussion. And Michael Egnor said, well, Matt, you didn't address any of the points that you did not address any of the arguments for the existence of God. Why is that? And Matt said, well, I wasn't expecting to be faced with that. I thought we were going to have more of a sort of open exchange. But we can do that if you want. Now, I thought that was fine. I thought that what he did there was absolutely fine. And then Michael Egnor said, well, Matt said, which one do you want to talk about? And Michael Egnor said something to the effect that, well, how familiar are you with them? And Matt said, well, it depends on which one it is. And he said, okay, well, let's take the, I think it's the second of Thomas Aquinas's arguments, which is the causation argument. Are you familiar with Thomas Aquinas's causation argument? And Matt said, well, not verbatim. I vaguely remember doing it. I vaguely remember Thomas Aquinas, but I probably would not be able to give you a rundown, the sequence of logical steps. And Michael Egnor said, well, if you're ignorant on such a basic argument for the existence of God, how can we possibly talk about this? If you've got that level of ignorance, how can you even claim that you've got a rational understanding of all the issues? Now, you can see here, this is a debating ploy, not to really tackle the issues, but to try and undermine the authority and intelligence of your opponent. So we've got these arguments for the existence of God, which are fairly well known in the philosophical community. Matt's not a philosopher. I would imagine that most philosophy PhDs would know these arguments fairly well. And I don't think the St. Thomas Aquinas arguments are that complex, actually. But he caught Matt a bit on the back foot. And Matt was not able or not willing to, he simply could not remember all the logical steps in the causation argument, St. Thomas Aquinas' causation argument. And that led to accusations of ignorance. And they got into quite a kind of slanging match, quite a kind of heated debate, argument about that, and it sort of derailed the whole thing. And Egnor was labouring this point that Matt was ignorant, lacked the knowledge, and lacked the ability to tackle the issues, and that if he was in this position and ignorant about the arguments, how could he possibly have any kind of rational justification for dismissing God? I think Matt could have avoided that. I think that Matt could have avoided that. I think sometimes he needs to just take a little step back and think that he's in a debating situation, and he's got to think about his response rather than be emotional, because this guy really tripped him up, basically. I mean, he really did trip him up. I haven't seen Matt in the situation where Matt is admitting that he's ignorant, and he's even sometimes Matt can go to extremes to prove a point, and his point, which actually in a way is correct, that even if he doesn't know any of these arguments, even if he's ignorant about all of them, it doesn't help the case for God. Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there are some important things in those arguments which, if Matt was not so ignorant about them, would make him realize that God exists. And that's what Michael Egnor was more or less saying, with some kind of justification. But how could Matt have avoided that? Well, he could have avoided it quite simply. He could have said, and this is probably what I would have said, was that I spent years in the past analyzing all the principal philosophical arguments for the existence of God. I spent a lot of time on them, and I've been through Thomas Aquinas. The causation argument, I vaguely recall it, but my memory is not brilliant, and I can't quite remember the steps. So can you present all the steps to me, and then we'll discuss it. Now, Matt could have said that, and it would have been completely okay, but because nobody's going to expect Matt to remember verbatim 10 arguments for the existence of God. Probably no philosopher in the world would be able to state them one after the other to a high degree of accuracy. But Matt fell into this trap of being accused of being ignorant. In fact, even admitting that he was ignorant, saying, "Well, okay, so what if I'm ignorant? It doesn't help your argument for the existence of God." But what it did do was allow his opponent to undermine him and to score points over him. And in debating, the idealist will say that there are no winners and no losers. We're here to try and get to a better understanding about our opponent's position, and we're trying to improve knowledge. Well, that's an idealist. But Matt's been debating long enough to realize that there's no value in being an honest debater and taking that idealistic position if you're going to let your opponent make you look like a complete fool. Because the people watching that debate, a lot of waverers, people who are sitting on the fence, will think, he made you look like a bit of a fool, really, Matt. And I'm wondering whether, because of the way you dealt with that I'm wondering actually whether your opinions and the way you deal with these rational arguments is really as good as it could be. And, well, actually, maybe God exists after all. I mean, somebody who's wavering might actually think that just because the other person, by questionable means, has made you look like a bit of has made you admit that you're ignorant about these arguments. There's no need to admit something which is not necessary to admit. If you don't even if you've never heard the argument before, if you're in a debating position, you should never admit it. I mean, you can always say, "Oh yes, I vaguely recall that. You've got it there in front of you. Can you go through the steps and then we'll discuss it?" So it was unnecessary. He could have easily sidestepped that. He made a bit of a mess of it. and because he wasn't dealing with an honest interlocutor. But in the world of debating, particularly Christian apologetics, there are very few honest interlocutors. They're always going to be trying to trip you up as an atheist. Of course they are. So I was really surprised that Matt wasn't ready for that, and he allowed himself to get into quite a temper, threatened to walk away, etc., etc. And given all his abilities and everything, it was unnecessary. And I think it's come about because he's allowing his emotions to dictate what he says. He used to be very cool. Okay, he'd lose his temper now and again, particularly if some stupid Catholic was saying that children who are being abused deserve it because of crimes in a past life. I mean, anybody could get angry with that kind of thing and tell the caller to fuck off. Of course. But this is a debating situation where he really should have kept his temper, and he should have just been aware of these strategies to prevent himself from getting into a position where he's being accused of being completely ignorant. And not only accused, but admitting. He says, well, okay, what if I'm ignorant about all 10 arguments? It doesn't establish the existence of God, which is what you're here to do. So that sort of thing didn't go so well. What did save him a bit was when finally his opponent did actually go through the Thomas Aquinas argument, because Matt in the end said, okay, well, look, if you want to discuss this, let's discuss it. Go through the argument and I'll respond. Well, that was after 10 minutes of wrangling, unnecessary wrangling, and being made to admit that you're ignorant about all these arguments. So I didn't think that went so well. As for the causation argument, once they got down to the bare bones about it, once they got into the nitty-gritty detail, he was fine, because he can deal with these things. He had all the objections to the causation, the cosmological argument. All his objections are completely good and sound. But the main thing is that, just moving on, is that Michael did not want to discuss his own beliefs. He didn't want to talk about his own specific beliefs, because of course he's using these arguments, Thomas Aquinas and everything, and all the other ones. And even if you accept that any of these arguments lead to proof in the existence of God, which God? Which God? Of course, in a debate, you should never say, well, let's say for the sake of argument that there is a God. How do you know it's a Christian God? Don't do that. Don't give that ground. I never, in any debate, well, I've not been in any debates, but if I'm arguing with Christians, I never say, let's say for the sake of argument, God does exist. I'd never give that concession, because it's got to be established. I won't ever give that concession. But of course, which God? Because he's a Catholic, this guy. And at best, most of the arguments only prove that they don't really prove, but let's say they do prove. I don't like conceding that, but with the Kalam cosmological arguments, everything exists that has a cause. The universe exists, therefore the universe has a cause. God is not in the premises, and he's not in the conclusion. All you've got there is a cause. Could be anything. You're extrapolating, and unjustifiably, that it is a God. Not only that, but it's a Christian God and the God of the Bible. How you can make that step, I don't know. That's a real mystery. But people like Michael Egnor will not want to get into that. They'll want to keep it at the pure philosophy, because they've got no way of justifying how they can get from a cause to Yahweh, the Old Testament and the New Testament and the resurrection. They've got absolutely no way of connecting those. So sorry, I didn't want to rehearse any of the arguments. I wanted to move on to the next thing, which is the problem of evil, the part of the debate that they had. And again, he kind of trapped Matt And I've seen this before. I've seen it in debates. A Christian will suddenly say, do you think it's objectively wrong for somebody to rape a baby? They will think of the most vile kind of objectionable crime, and they'll give you an either or question. Do you think it's objectively wrong? And if you say no, it's not objectively wrong to rape a baby, they'll accuse you of having no morality, effectively, and that it's okay in your book, it's okay in your moral code to go out and rape a baby because you've got no moral absolute. You've got nobody laying down what the morals are. So this was another trap. And when he asked Matt this, do you believe that it's objectively wrong for somebody to rape a baby? Matt kind of stumbled a bit, and I think he realized he'd been trapped. And he said, well, I don't want to go over what he said, but in my opinion, the only way to deal with that, frankly, is to say that there's no objective morality. As a society, we decide based on certain standards what morals are going to be. And Matt, quite rightly, has said that there's a moral standard of what did he say? Well-being to the individual, or health and well-being to the individual. And being raped, having your head chopped off, and all these other crimes are not consistent with that. And we, as a social species, as an organized civilization, that is the standard that we've set. And then he said, where do you get your morality? And this is the only time that Michael Egnor actually said what he believes. And he said, God wrote it in his heart. So his moral guide is actually innate, because God put it there before he was born. So there's a God, there's a moral code, and it's been put into each one of us. I don't really want to get into that too much, because I didn't want to discuss, it's not what I want to do to discuss, but just briefly. I mean, I would have so many objections to that, not least that when you're children, you steal things and you do wrong things, and your mother needs to give you a slap and tell you that it's wrong. So clearly children are not born with this moral code. Otherwise, you wouldn't take things off your brother, or you wouldn't take things off your friend and steal things and do wrong things and hit them and other things like that. Because you would have that, it'd be written on your heart. So you would behave in a very moral way without your parents having to tell you, without having to give you a bit of a slap to teach you the moral code which is accepted by society. So again, I just thought that Matt kind of slightly unnecessarily fell into that one by maybe hesitating a bit too much over his answer. But obviously everything that I mean, I still think that Matt had all the arguments. And one of the things I didn't like about Michael Egnor is that he was saying, you put the problem of evil to an atheist and he will tap dance all over the place. And atheists are always doing this, atheists are always doing that. Atheists haven't got a good moral code. And he's talking about atheism like it's a religion. And Matt pointed out, it's not. Atheism is not a religion. It's just a response to a single claim that a God exists. And atheists either don't believe in God, or hard atheists will say there is no God. That's all it is. So for somebody who knows Thomas Aquinas' 5 arguments for the existence of God, and the teleological argument, ontological argument, etc., and all the other arguments, he doesn't even know that atheism is not a religion. It's not an ideology. It's just a response to a particular claim. And as Matt pointed out, there are atheists who've got there are some atheists who've got supernatural beliefs, and it's politically atheists are as different as Christians are different. It's just there's no atheistic code. A lot of humanists, but I mean, there are conspiracy theorists who are atheists, and all sorts of stuff. So he's wrong about that. He hasn't got a proper grasp of what atheism is. I think he does have a grasp. He's just deliberately trying to make atheists look. He's trying to make atheists look like it's a religion. That's a topic for another video, which I'm going to do. But anyway, so that's about it. I'm going to post a link to that debate. I do recommend that you watch it, because I do think that it's quite interesting to watch the art of debate between these two. I think as a debater, Michael, in some ways, was more effective, even though I didn't accept his arguments, but he was more effective in terms of undermining Matt. In the comments below, people are saying, "Oh, Michael, you're such a scum. You convinced me that there is no God by you're such a horrible person, etc., etc." But bear in mind that if you've got Matt Dillahunty in a debate, it's mostly going to be atheists who are going and viewing those videos. So he's kind of preaching to the converted. You know what I mean? There's hardly any comments from Christians at all, because obviously they don't want to listen to what Matt's got to say on their religion. So that's fair enough on the whole anyway. And to be honest with you, the atheist experience as a show for me has got worse year on year. I don't really look forward to watching it anymore, because I think that the arguments have been heard so many times. I get bored when atheists come on and start talking, but there are so few theists calling that they're starting to let atheists come on. I don't want to listen to atheists, and well, I'm expecting you to listen to me. Well, you can listen if you want, because I'm more interested in hearing, if you'll forgive me for saying so, Christian bullshit, and I'm interested in having that broken down online, and exposed. That's what I find sort of amusing and interesting, and I found that happened a lot more in the earlier shows. And I mean, there are some hilarious videos. I know they used to think that a lot of them were prank calls, but no, they weren't prank calls. And I mean, especially with the southern accents and everything, and it's just I feel like going back and watching some of them again. They're so funny. So of course, that's what it is for me. It's amusement. I'm only here for my own amusement in terms of religion. I'm not searching for any higher truth. I'm not a spiritual searcher. I just find it damn funny and amusing. And I'm a bit of an iconoclast in that sense, that I will mock sacred beliefs. Obviously, if a Muslim burst in here right now with a machine gun and pointed it at my head, I'd be on my knees begging for mercy and converting to Islam. Of course I would. Who wouldn't? But yeah, so I just find it amusing, and it's been a great source of amusement to me for years. So if you're a Christian and you're watching this, just bear that in mind, and that's why I'm doing it. But nevertheless, I hope that you'll find some interest in what I've got to say. And that's about it for now. I'll post a link to that debate, and I hope you do watch it. Maybe you'll disagree with me and say that Matt handled him really well. I don't know. I'd like more people to disagree with what I've got to say, so we can have a bit of a debate in the comments section. So anyway, that's all for now. All the best to you, and see you soon.